When two cops pulled over Walter Richardson for driving a beat-up van that looked like it had survived 2 wars, the last thing they expected was what came next. When a Navy admiral stepped out of a sedan just minutes later, everything changed, including their assumptions about this quiet veteran. What secrets did his humble van hold? And why were those addresses scribbled inside so important? The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting shadows across the quiet county road. Walter Richardson gripped the steering wheel of his battered blue van with steady hands, knuckles slightly swollen from years of wear and weather. The vehicle groaned faintly as he eased off the accelerator, its engine ticking rhythmically like an old clock winding down. To anyone passing by, the van looked more like a relic than a mode of transportation. Its once vivid paint was now faded and chipped, revealing patches of rust that clung stubbornly to the metal beneath. A homemade bumper, welded together with scraps of steel, jutted awkwardly at one corner, evidence of countless repairs done out of necessity rather than choice. Walter's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, catching sight of the cobalt and white patrol car trailing close behind him. Its flashing lights pierced the calm of the countryside, red and blue reflections dancing across the cracked windshield of the van. He sighed softly but didn't seem surprised. This wasn't the first time someone had taken issue with his old tin can, his van, as he affectionately called it. Still, he pulled over smoothly onto the shoulder, careful not to block the narrow road. As the van came to a stop, he turned off the ignition and sat quietly, waiting. 2 officers stepped out of the cruiser, their boots crunching against the gravel. One was older, with a stern face etched by years of routine patrols. The other younger, eager, his hand resting instinctively on the holster at his side. They approached the driver's side window, their expressions already hardened before they even spoke. "Sir," the older officer began, his tone clipped and authoritative, "do you know why we stopped you?" Walter rolled down the window, the mechanism creaking loudly as if protesting the effort. His voice was calm, measured. "I assume it has something to do with my van looking like it lost a fight." The younger officer snorted, glancing back at his partner. "That's one way to put it. Your inspection sticker's expired, and frankly, this thing looks like a hazard waiting to happen." He gestured vaguely at the van's exterior, his lip curling slightly. "You really ought to consider trading it in for something safer." Walter tilted his head, studying them both with sharp, gray-blue eyes that seemed far too knowing for his frail frame. "Safer?" he repeated, almost amused. "This van's carried me through worse than your opinions, son. She may not look pretty, but she gets the job done." The older officer frowned, unimpressed. "We'll be the judge of that. License and registration, please." Reaching into the glove compartment, Walter produced a small folder containing his papers. The younger officer leaned in to inspect them, his gaze lingering on the worn edges of the documents. When he took them from Walter's hand, he did so with unnecessary force, causing one of the pages to tear along a fragile seam. Walter flinched imperceptibly but said nothing, merely watching as the officer examined the information. "Well," the older officer muttered after a moment, "registration seems valid, but this inspection sticker," he shook his head, "it's been expired for months. You're risking everyone else on the road driving around in this contraption." Walter nodded slowly, unfazed. "If it makes you feel better, I'll get it sorted soon enough. But I can assure you, there's nothing wrong with her under the hood." With that, he reached for the door handle and stepped out of the van, moving deliberately despite the ache in his joints. The officers exchanged a glance, unsure what to make of this elderly man who radiated such quiet confidence. He walked to the front of the van and popped the hood, revealing an engine bay that was startlingly clean and well-maintained. Every bolt gleamed, every hose was neatly secured, and the motor itself hummed softly when he tapped it lightly with his fingers. "See for yourself," he said simply, stepping aside. Both officers hesitated, clearly caught off guard. The younger one leaned in reluctantly, running his flashlight over the compartment. "Ha!" he admitted grudgingly. "Looks decent." "Decent," Walter echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Decent won't get you through a blizzard or up a mountain pass. Decent doesn't keep running when everything else gives out. No offense, boys, but this van's tougher than either of you. His words hung in the air, sharp yet devoid of malice. The older officer cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. Even so, we need to conduct a thorough search. Standard procedure. Walter shrugged, stepping back. Be my guest. As the officers began rummaging through the van, the younger one opened the glove compartment again, his brow furrowing as he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he found a handwritten list of addresses, each accompanied by a date and brief notes. At the top of the page, written in bold letters, was the word Fremont. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. Walter's expression shifted ever so slightly, though his tone remained neutral. "Just some reminders. Nothing illegal, I assure you." The officer narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious. Reminders for what? And why Fremont? Before Walter could respond, the older officer intervened, tucking the paper into his pocket. "We'll hold on to this for now. Let's finish the search." But as they continued their inspection, neither officer noticed the subtle smile that played at the corners of Walter's lips, or the weight of meaning behind the list they'd just discovered. The air grew heavier as the officers continued their search, their skepticism deepening with every item they unearthed. Walter stood silently by the van's open door, arms crossed loosely over his chest, watching them with an unreadable expression. His calm demeanor seemed almost unnerving now, a quiet defiance that neither officer could quite place. They had expected to find something incriminating, a weapon, stolen goods, or some other explanation for the cryptic list, but instead, all they encountered were mundane objects. A tattered map folded neatly on the passenger seat, a pair of work gloves stained with grease, and a small toolbox filled with wrenches and screwdrivers. "Empty your pockets," the older officer commanded abruptly, breaking the tense silence. His tone left no room for negotiation. Walter blinked once, slowly, before complying without protest. He reached into the front pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out two items, a tarnished silver pocketknife and a crumpled receipt. The knife caught the light as he held it up, its handle engraved with intricate markings that hinted at craftsmanship far beyond anything mass-produced. The receipt, though faded, bore the logo of a local grocery store and listed the purchase of 300 cans of soup. "What's this?" the younger officer asked sharply, taking the knife from Walter's hand. His fingers brushed against the insignia etched into the blade, a trident flanked by anchors, unmistakably the emblem of the U.S. Navy. "Where'd you get this?" Walter's lips curved into a faint smile, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the road behind the patrol car, where a figure had just emerged from a sleek black sedan that had pulled up unnoticed. The man wore a crisp navy uniform adorned with medals and ribbons, his posture rigid and commanding. Admiral Dane adjusted his cap as he approached, his piercing blue eyes scanning the scene with quiet authority. "Gentlemen," the admiral said, his voice carrying a weight that demanded respect, "is there a problem here?" Both officers straightened instinctively, their earlier bravado faltering under the scrutiny of someone so clearly superior in rank and presence. The older officer stepped forward cautiously. "Admiral, sir, we're conducting a routine traffic stop. This vehicle appears to be unsafe, and we're investigating potential violations." Dane arched an eyebrow, glancing briefly at the van before fixing his gaze on the officer. "Unsafe? Really?" It wasn't a question, it was a challenge. He moved closer, circling the van with deliberate steps, his polished shoes crunching lightly on the gravel. Stopping near the engine compartment, he peered inside, nodding appreciatively. "Well, I'll be damned. She runs like a dream, doesn't she?" The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, clutching the pocketknife tighter. "Sir, we found this on him. Is it yours?" Dane chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, son. That belongs to Walter. But if you knew what it represented, you'd think twice about questioning its owner." He turned to face Walter, who still stood quietly beside the van. "Tell me, Richson, how many miles does she have on her now?" Walter shrugged modestly. "Hard to say. somewhere north of 300,000. But she's never let me down. 300,000? The older officer echoed incredulously. That thing looks like it should have been scrapped decades ago. And yet here we are, Dane replied smoothly, his tone sharpening slightly. You see, gentlemen, this thing has done more for this country than most people will ever know. It survived hurricanes, floods, and even enemy fire. Ask yourself, what have you done lately that compares? The officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to respond. The younger one finally spoke up, gesturing awkwardly at the van. But why Fremont? What's he doing with that list? Dane's expression softened, though his eyes remained intense. Fremont is a town not unlike any other, filled with families struggling to make ends meet. Walter's been delivering supplies there every week for years. Food, blankets, medicine, you name it. And today, he's restocking because winter's coming, and those folks can't afford to wait. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The officers looked between the Admiral and Walter, their earlier certainty crumbling. They noticed the neatly stacked crates of canned goods in the back of the van, partially hidden beneath folded blankets. Each box bore labels indicating donations for shelters and food banks. So, the younger officer began hesitantly, his voice tinged with guilt. All those addresses, they're stops along the way? Walter nodded. Some are homes, others are community centers. People who need help but won't ask for it. Veterans, mostly. Folks who served their country and now feel forgotten. The older officer cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. We didn't realize. No, Walter interrupted gently. You didn't, and that's okay. Not everyone sees what's right in front of them. Admiral Dane stepped closer to the van, running a hand along its dented surface as if paying tribute to an old friend. This van may not look like much, but she's carried hope to places where it was needed most. She's earned her scars, just like the man driving her. Turning back to the officers, he added, I suggest you remember that next time you judge someone based on appearances. The younger officer handed the pocketknife back to Walter, his movements hesitant, almost reverent. Sorry, sir. We didn't mean to. It's all right, Walter said with a dismissive wave. Mistakes happen. Just try to learn from them. As the Admiral opened the trunk to reveal additional boxes of supplies, the officers helped load them into the van, their earlier hostility replaced by a newfound sense of purpose. By the time the last crate was secured, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the road in shades of twilight. Walter climbed back into the driver's seat, adjusting the rearview mirror one final time. Before closing the door, he glanced at the officers standing nearby. Thanks for the assist, boys. Maybe next time we'll grab coffee instead. With that, he started the engine, the familiar hum filling the air as the van rumbled to life. The officers stepped aside, watching silently as Walter drove off, the taillights fading into the distance. Admiral Dane lingered for a moment longer, his gaze thoughtful. Never underestimate the power of humility, he murmured, almost to himself. Then, with a nod to the officers, he returned to his sedan and followed the van down the road, leaving behind only the faint scent of diesel and the lingering weight of lessons learned. The sedan's headlights cut through the twilight haze as Admiral Dane followed Walter's van along the winding country road. Inside the car, the Admiral's hands gripped the steering wheel with quiet purpose, his mind replaying fragments of the encounter they'd just left behind. He knew the officers wouldn't forget what they'd seen, or rather what they hadn't seen at first glance. But he also understood that some lessons couldn't be taught in words alone. They needed to be felt, experienced, and absorbed. Ahead, Walter's van lumbered steadily, its engine humming like an old hymn sung softly into the night. Despite its outward appearance, the vehicle moved with surprising grace, navigating potholes and uneven terrain without complaint. It was a testament not only to Walter's mechanical skill but also to the resilience of something built to endure far beyond its expected lifespan. As Dane watched, his thoughts drifted back years, to storms, battles, and moments when this very van had been more than just a mode of transportation. It had been a lifeline. By the time they reached Fremont, The town was cloaked in darkness, save for the faint glow of streetlights casting pools of amber onto the cracked sidewalks. Walter pulled over near a small community center, its windows darkened but its doors slightly ajar, as if waiting for him. Dane parked nearby, stepping out of the sedan to join Walter, who was already unloading crates from the van. Together, they worked in silence, their movements synchronized despite having never done this together before. As they stacked the boxes inside the building, Dane finally broke the quiet. "You know," he began, brushing dust from his hands, "I think it's time you told them the whole story, not just about the deliveries but about her." He nodded toward the van, which sat patiently outside like an old soldier awaiting orders. Walter paused mid-motion, his weathered face illuminated briefly by the flickering light of a nearby lamppost. His expression softened, though there was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "It's not my story to tell anymore," he said quietly. "She earned those scars long before I came along." Dane crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Maybe so, but those scars mean something now. To you, to everyone whose life she's touched." For a moment, Walter didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention back to the task at hand, stacking another box carefully on top of the pile. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories too precious to keep buried. "She started off as part of a naval relief convoy in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria hit. That was 20 years ago, give or take. Back then, she wasn't this beat-up old thing. She was sturdy, reliable, and fast enough to outrun trouble when it found us." He stepped outside, running a hand along the van's rusted frame. His fingers traced faint indentations near the rear passenger door, bullet marks partially concealed beneath layers of patchwork paint. "We were ferrying insulin to a hospital under siege by looters. No electricity, no backup generators, and people dying because they couldn't get medicine. I drove straight through gunfire to make sure those vials made it. Lost 2 good men that day, but we saved hundreds more." Dane listened intently, his jaw tightening as Walter continued. "After that, she became part of the fleet for disaster response teams. Floods, wildfires, earthquakes, you name it, she was there. She carried survivors to safety, hauled supplies to remote villages, and even doubled as a makeshift ambulance once or twice. When I retired, the Navy offered her to me as thanks for my service. Said she deserved someone who could still put her to work." A wry smile tugged at Walter's lips. "Guess they figured I fit the bill. Since then, she's been hauling donations instead of troops. Same mission, different battlefield." The Admiral shook his head slowly, his admiration evident. "And yet, most people would look at her and see nothing but junk." "Most people don't look close enough," Walter replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "They see rust and dents and assume she's worthless. But every mark on her tells a story. Every scratch is proof that she kept going when others gave up." He opened the side door of the van, revealing shelves lined with neatly folded blankets, the same ones the officers had dismissed earlier. Pulling one free, he held it up for Dane to see. "These aren't just blankets. They're reminders that no matter how cold it gets, someone out there cares enough to send warmth. Same goes for the soup cans and the clothes stuffed in the back. None of it's fancy, but it keeps folks alive until spring comes around." Dane exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Do you ever think about retiring her? Letting someone else take over?" Walter chuckled softly, closing the van door with a firm click. "Not a chance. She might be old, but she's got plenty of miles left in her. Besides," he hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, "if she breaks down, I'll push her myself. Can't let people go hungry because I decided to quit." The Admiral smiled faintly, recognizing the stubborn determination that had always defined Walter. "You haven't changed much, have you?" "Not really," Walter admitted. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing." They finished loading the supplies in companionable silence, the weight of shared history hanging between them like a comforting presence. As they prepared to leave, Dane gestured toward the van's trunk, where additional boxes of food remained stowed away. "What about those? You planning to drop them somewhere else tonight?" Walter nodded, climbing back into the driver's seat. Couple more stops before heading home. Old habits die hard. Dane stepped aside, letting the van's door swing shut. Before returning to his sedan, he leaned in through the open window. Take care of yourself, Richson, and her too. The world needs more people like you, and fewer assumptions like theirs. With a final nod, Walter started the engine, the familiar hum filling the air once again. As the van pulled away, its headlights cutting through the darkness, Dane lingered for a moment longer, watching until the taillights disappeared entirely. Then, climbing back into his car, he murmured to himself, "Some stories are written in ink, others are etched in steel." The morning after their encounter in Fremont, the two officers sat in the dimly lit briefing room of the county police station. The older officer, Detective Harris, stared at the crumpled list they had confiscated from Walter's van, now spread flat on the table between them. His fingers traced over the names and addresses scrawled in faded ink, each line resonating with a weight he hadn't fully understood until Admiral Dane's words echoed in his mind. People who served their country and now feel forgotten. The younger officer, Officer Randolph, leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't spoken much since returning to the station, but his expression betrayed a storm of conflicting emotions: guilt, frustration, and something softer, like the beginnings of resolve. Finally, he broke the silence. "I don't get it," he muttered almost to himself. "Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he tell us what he was doing?" Harris sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease the tension building there. "Because we didn't give him a chance. We judged him before we even knew him. Hell, we judged him based on a van that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard." Randolph frowned, glancing down at the list again. "But those places, those addresses, they're all veterans' homes. I checked while you were talking to the chief last night. Every single one." Harris nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the paper. "Yeah, and not just any veterans, ones who've fallen through the cracks. Guys like Walter who served their time and then came home to find the world moved on without them. Folks too proud to ask for help, even when they need it most." The younger man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So what do we do about it?" For a moment, Harris didn't answer. He picked up the list, studying it intently as if searching for answers hidden within its simple lines. Then, setting it down again, he turned to Randolph with an uncharacteristic softness in his voice. "We start by making this right. For Walter. For the others like him." By midday, the entire department was buzzing with activity. A hastily assembled task force had been formed under Harris's leadership, tasked with addressing the oversight that had allowed someone like Walter Richson to slip through the cracks unnoticed. The first order of business was clear: overhaul the system for inspecting vehicles used by volunteers delivering essential services. No more blanket dismissals based on appearances. Every vehicle would be evaluated not just for safety, but for its purpose and impact on the community. When word reached Walter later that week, courtesy of a handwritten note delivered alongside his newly issued inspection certificate, he read it twice, his lips curling into a faint smile. The letter explained the new initiative, a free annual inspection program for volunteer drivers, and included a special license plate for his van, NV 1989, short for Navy Veteran, 1989. Beneath the official seal, a postscript read simply, "Thank you for reminding us what truly matters." A week later, Walter parked his van outside the same community center in Fremont where Admiral Dane had joined him on their previous trip. This time, however, he wasn't alone. As he stepped out of the vehicle, he spotted Randolph and another officer approaching, their uniforms crisp and polished despite the chill in the air. Both carried boxes stacked high with canned goods and supplies. "Morning, Mr. Richson," Randolph said, his tone cautious yet respectful. "We brought some extras from the station's food drive. Thought you might need a hand loading up." Walter raised an eyebrow, though amusement flickered in his eyes. "Well, don't let me stop you. But aren't you boys supposed to be writing tickets or something?" Harris chuckled, stepping forward to shake Walter's hand firmly. "Not today. Today we're here to learn, and maybe make amends." Over the next hour, the officers worked alongside Walter, unloading crates from the van and restocking shelves inside the center. At one point, Randolph paused to examine the blankets folded neatly on the van's shelves, running his fingers over the fabric thoughtfully. "These really go to people who need them?" he asked, glancing at Walter. "They sure do," Walter replied, stacking another box nearby. "Keeps them warm when the nights get cold. Same goes for the soup cans and clothes. Little things add up." Randolph nodded silently, his earlier skepticism replaced by something akin to reverence. For the first time in his career, he realized that justice wasn't always about enforcing laws. It was also about understanding the humanity behind them. As the work wound down, Harris pulled a small sticker from his pocket and handed it to Walter. "Figured your van could use a little decoration," he said with a grin. The sticker depicted a weathered old truck emblazoned with the words, "Tin Can, Heart of Gold." Walter laughed softly, slapping the sticker onto the van's rear bumper. "About time she got some recognition," he quipped, patting the rusted surface affectionately. Before leaving, Harris extended a hand once more, his grip firm and sincere. "We owe you an apology, Walter, and we'll do better moving forward. For you and everyone else out there doing good work without asking for thanks." Walter shook his head, his expression thoughtful yet unwavering. "Apologies are nice, but actions speak louder. Keep showing up for people, and you'll have done enough." As the officers drove away, Walter climbed back into the van, adjusting the rearview mirror to catch one last glimpse of the sticker gleaming proudly in the sunlight. Starting the engine, he let the familiar hum settle around him like an old friend. With a satisfied nod, he eased the van onto the road, heading toward his next destination. Behind him, the taillights blinked once as he signaled a turn, leaving behind only tire tracks and the quiet promise of perseverance. Somewhere along the way, the world had begun to see beyond the scars etched into his van, and into the heart of the man who drove her. This isn't just a story about a man and his van. It's a reminder that appearances deceive, and quiet heroes walk among us. What would you have done if you were one of those officers? Comment below, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this, right here on Embrace the Journey.